So I've got a few questions for Sushi. Thanks for your session. It was super informative. It was kind of funny. I was looking at some of our charts. We had a dinner here in Palo Alto about 3 weeks ago. And we actually had a question, which was, how many people have a metric? And most of the people in the audience had degrees and they were qualified, so they knew what a metric was and did math. Tied to their AI experiment, their AI goal. Actually, less than a third put up their hands, which and we know of the third, maybe 20% were fibbing. So when I see your data at scale, it's kind of interesting.
Scary. But it's also scary, actually. Think about it. If we collectively look at the capital that's getting deployed against AI, I mean, you all have seen various estimates of this at a single enterprise level, at an industry-wide level. This has to be one of the largest experiments in human history within the enterprise, which is famously very risk-averse, conservative, and yet we are apparently blowing billions of these dollars, trillions, in experiments without metrics. So I'll leave it at that.
I was over in London about 2 weeks ago, and there's going to be a question on the back of this. And we met a wealth management company, and it was the marketing team who got all dressed up for the meeting and came in and said, we need AI to increase the velocity of production of materials. The very aggressive company looking to grow tremendously. And they walked in as a separate department. And as we entered into the conversation with them, we said, where's your bottleneck? And they said, it's compliance. And I said, where's the compliance team? Because that takes about 4 days and I said, hey, have you thought about building a compliance agent into your marketing workflow and reducing that by 3-4 days? So they were very much in that deploy mode. They should have been in the invent, reshape mode. Reshape. So you had a very enthusiastic team who were pursuing the change management as they should, good citizens of the company. But perhaps we're doing it in the wrong way. How do you actually think about companies taking this leap and really deciding, am I a deploy, am I a reshape, or am I in an invent stage? You've got bottoms up choice, you've got top down. What are you seeing out there?
I love the question. It's very real, by the way. So the way we talk to our clients and what we encourage them to do is, you're right. So bottoms up, top down is a good way to think about it, right? There is, if you go bottoms up, team by team, let's take your marketing team as an example. They've got visibility to the marketing process. They do their homework right, they understand AI, and they try to apply AI. They're going to end up with a version that is, hey, I've got this process, this is what I can control, I can apply AI, I'm going to eke out, 20-25% improvement, right? The issue is you still have the silos, which you rightly identified. And so you are limited actually to a false ceiling here. Breaking the silo would get you a higher impact, maybe better outcome, less errors, etc. on many other metrics beyond just cost or time taken, right? Which is number one realization. So what we've discovered in all of the work we've done with our clients is it's really important to do both. You have to have both top-down sponsorship in order to be able to break down the silos. And so we often tell our clients that the number one decision that you can make if you're going to go down this AI journey is to actually find your sponsor, your accountable leader. It's most probably somebody in the C-suite. It could be the CEO himself or herself. It could be a COO. One financial services client that we worked with, we had the CFO who actually set out targets for the company in terms of growth, margin, etc., which then necessitated the breaking down of silos across teams to be able to get to those targets. So I don't think it's a choice. You need the creativity and the engagement of the bottoms up to get the adoption and the actual realization. You need the championship and sponsorship of a C-suite to break down the silos. And lastly, on deploy, reshape, and invent, we also see this as a portfolio. I encourage enterprises to think about this as a portfolio of initiatives. It's no regrets for you to deploy whatever your SaaS vendors are including in their licenses. You anyway have to reimagine your internal processes, and you anyway have to think of better ways to serving your customers in customer-facing processes and products. It's just a matter of how you sequence your portfolio and how you allocate your dollars to them.
Lack of training in the industry. I'm a CEO of a company, and I have peers that I'm compared against. I have shareholder value to deliver upon. But I have this gap. I don't have the talent who can execute an AI strategy. What advice do you give to that leadership or the department head? You've got low-code offerings. Is that the route you suggest? How do you encourage people to take that step so they can actually keep pace? The ultimate goal here is be competitive and differentiate from your competition.
Yeah. This is a real one. I'm sure all of you feeling this pain. So maybe breaking this down into a few things. One of the piece of information we found when we did our analysis on winners, what they're doing uniquely to differentiate them was they are focusing on a smaller number of use cases. Okay, so the focus really matters. I think by now you all know, if you were to do a use case analysis, you'd come up with 1,200 use cases across the enterprise for AI. And then you peanut butter your resources is not going to work. So focusing down on a very small, finite list. Then the next step is talent is a shortage industry-wide. There nearly aren't enough AI skilled practitioners here. And so the answer to that is twofold. We live in this time, exciting time right now, where we have the technology ecosystem mushrooming like crazy. And some of the larger hyperscalers, especially, whether it's the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts of the world, who are investing a lot of dollars to get certain, what shall I say, marquee use cases at scale established. And so we do see best practice clients and end customers leaning on the pick your partners. I think Sailesh summarized it very well. Pick a couple of partners and do your learning journey together with the technology vendor, because they have the platform, the technical resources. And then you've got very selective upskilling, because remember, you've narrowed down your portfolio to a particular starting point. So you can be more targeted in both the teams. Perhaps it's a marketing use case that you've decided to reshape. And so you can start to do a very targeted adoption journey. So, we served a very large global investment bank on reshaping their engineering and R&D workflow. And so we worked with 45 developers in a cohort to upskill them on how they're going to go about the different stages of the software development lifecycle with AI. Right? And once you establish those best practices, then you can roll out larger trainings. So phased training programs, pick your technology ecosystem, right? And prioritize your use cases to try to bite-size the upskilling problem and get your playbook right, and then try to roll it out at scale.
So the early adopters for AI, customer service, very early, easy to measure, repetitive activity.
Huge impact.
Huge impact. But we're also seeing this clustering around sales and marketing functions embracing it. Now, on the other side, I think you mentioned that IT spend is going to increase as you create these savings over here. If you were to guide a company to say, get these cluster of groups to go first, because you may avoid or get the benefit of avoiding duplicity of costs, because you can replicate that workflow across these departments. Where would you encourage people to start outside of customer service?
Let me make sure I understand your question. So it's where do you start so that you can
avoid duplication of effort in the reproduction of, leverage your models, leverage the workflow development.
Yeah. So what we've found is that there's a couple of workflows, again, in the Reshape, which is your internal operational workflows. You're right. So customer service operations is number one. We have started seeing a lot of traction in the sales process, just the overall sales process. I'm talking a little bit more here on B2B sales, which traditionally has been very labor intensive, very one-off too, when you think about it, right? B2B buyers are, enterprise buyers are, very distributed within the enterprise. So anyway, lots of nuances in that process. The pre-sales can be quite technical sometimes, can be complex, multiple buyers. And so, but we have started to see AI start to play a very meaningful role if you take different steps of that process, okay? And that's very applicable. Those components are very applicable in many other workflows. Similarly, we're now beginning to see, even across some portions of HR, okay, not some of the more sensitive parts, but certainly some self-service operations, for example, commonly, to improve the employee experience. So I think, and engineering, sorry, I should have said that up front, by the way. Engineering, I think the reason is just like customer service operations, there's a lot of impact. And also it is very representative of knowledge work that occurs more broadly. And so as the process gets redesigned for engineering, the close parallels exist in other types of knowledge work. So those are really the hot pockets, I would say, that we're seeing: marketing, B2B sales, engineering, where we see a lot of client activity right now.
Mike, I don't know if you have a spare microphone, but if any questions from the audience for Suchi or I? It's got one up here. If it's on cybersecurity, you can handle it.
It's actually not on cybersecurity, but thanks, Call. It's really more about risk and fear. And the question is, there's people in the organization that are paid for bad things not to happen. And so how do you get those folks comfortable in not being the office of no? Yeah. Compliance, legal, safety, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think this is where there's a twofold approach, right? I mean, actually threefold. So there is a governance process that needs to get set up. So when you think about a single clearinghouse for the pipeline of ideas that make it to a production grade, past pilots, and I see you nodding your head, maybe there's an experience you should share. Yeah. Yeah. So I think, best practice is to have some sort of this, centralized place where you can, it's literally view it as a pipeline of ideas, and you have to graduate by passing stages. And you're very thoughtful as an enterprise in setting those metrics as to what constitutes a graduation level. And there has to be I'll just call it responsible AI. It encompasses all the things that you talked about. There have to be responsible AI metrics on that. Technically, the solution has to meet criteria such as, very basic things like you've got to be grounded, in the enterprise data, perhaps. You've got to set up safeguards. And so there's the technical architecture, which should be subject to a lot of pressure testing. And then last but not the least, there should be we've found that there's a disproportionate amount of time that the leaders in our survey spent on designing evaluation systems. And those are dynamic. They're not once done and forgotten. And so this is not a topic that I think nearly gets as much attention as it should. Evaluation systems, especially for agentic, are very dynamic. You need to reevaluate them like every week almost sometimes, right? And those evaluation safeguards, nothing's ever going to be 100%, but between the collection of these measures should be able to have a set of checkpoints that allows your legal, your cyber teams to be able to say, I sign off on this.
Yeah, I'll try and answer it slightly differently. I think fear is an emotion, risk is a probability of an event occurring. And I think when people get those confused, you may get problems. I was in Germany last week, and the president of the Bundestag said, we will stop AI at level 4. We will never go to level 5. That is fear without understanding risk. The fact that you created that narrative, I think, is a really interesting narrative. So I think that's some of those conversations are happening at a national level for very good reasons. Maybe it's GDPR or whatever reason, or fear of something else. I think the ways to get people comfortable is presenting the chaos that Raj presented, which is imagine a world where you've got 100-point solutions, which are not orchestrated, which do not have guardrails, where you do not have traceability, where you do not have governance, which I want to come back to in a second. That is the world you could create. Or you could design upfront with one thing in mind, outside of the efficiency stuff that we all do, design with governance in mind. And if you bring that governance right up into the decision, the early top of funnel decision making, I think you can manage the emotional side of fear and the consequence and probability side of risk.
I do want to double down also on guardrails. You talked about these. So testing, evaluation, guardrail. I love how you talked about fear being the emotion and differentiating it from risk. You know, we're all dealing with risk. Banks deal with a lot more risk than, you know, I don't know, somebody in a different industry. So, but fear is, and I think we're seeing more fear right now, by the way, because there's so many unknowns, and it also seems to be affecting a lot of us personally. This technology has touched us all in very deeply personal ways, in our personal lives, in our professional lives. And I want to say no one's untouched, actually, if I may. If, like, I've got a teenager at home who's feeling the brunt of it. So, you know, I think that's part of the reason the fear is the media is hyping it up. So you kind of have to be a little bit dispassionate and apply our engineering thinking, if you will, to it to help break it down and manage it.
What else?
Thanks so much. Matt Puller from Citibank. So you talk about responsible AI, and we hear that over and over. Responsible AI, responsible AI. We talk about guardrails. And you can do in a lot of the risk mitigation that we're talking about here is internal model risk management. That comes up a lot, how we interact with those. But what examples are there of, and it's so early, but what examples have you experienced with actual regulators? They're the ones who decide. You spoke about Germany and sort of their national view, but banks, OCC, right? We've had our conversations with them, but they're having the same struggle as all of us. It's so new. What's their view? So like, any examples or views you can share from what you're seeing in the field?
Yeah, well, by the way, the FDA today said that they intended to use AI to get through like 30,000-page reviews to speed up approvals. I don't know how many of you caught that in the newspaper today. I was like, okay, this is going to be fun. So I don't personally yet deal with the regulators. However, I will say the following. I do think the regulators are figuring this out as much as the enterprises. In fact, my sense and my colleagues' sense in BCG is that enterprises are actually on the front foot here, trying to figure it out to stay ahead of the regulators, right? Anticipating that it's a very conservative environment. And so what I've more seen happen is, I'll come back to those guardrails, right? When you go down to the basics of how this gets implemented, so if you take a basic process that you're mapping out, right? You've got to be able to apply criteria that says, what happens if this thing gives a wrong result? That's humanly not acceptable, right? Because it's, I don't know, it's tax calculations and it got the jurisdiction wrong, or, you know, something like that. I'm making this up right now. But you've got to be able to have all of that documented. And so what I see enterprises doing in regulated industries is making sure that the AI is having a clear auditable trail. For example, every single decision has to be able to be deconstructed with sources listed so that one's always be able to go back to be able to, get to the chain of thought essentially on what you can't have black boxes anywhere. That's inadmissible in a regulated industry. And the second thing I see them doing is on the building of guardrails and evaluation to make sure that, they've got like pages and pages and dozens and hundreds of these use cases that they're like, this situation I don't yet have case law personally that I can speak to on how regulators have treated it, but the auditability trail seems to be a really important way to be able to handle those regulatory discussions. I don't know, what do you see? You're in the industry.
I don't really have, I don't want nothing specific to us, but just in general, my personal views, I think it's going to be, I have no idea. I think the current administration, hopefully they're, whatever it is, hopefully they're more open to the idea. They seem to be.
They seem to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if they come down and hammer one of the banks,
yeah,
we're all going to shut it down.
It's all going to get shut down.
I think if they will come down and hammer one of the banks, I think it's the banks that have really invested in evaluation tools before they put the models live, and they do have full traceability. They will be the ones who will be able to continue. So again, I bring the conversation back to what is that governance conversation? What are those controls you have over those agents? How does a platform decision enable you meet the regulatory requirements? But I think the space is evolving. I think if you really look closely at enterprises, you're seeing a lot of enterprises deploy it first for their employees to get the company more comfortable. I don't know if that's a strategic decision, but there's a lot of effort there. Get your employees comfortable. Let's learn. It's like an incubator. And then there's sometimes a broader exposure to maybe more, call it customer facing or end user or whatever the correct description is. So I think some companies are stepping their way into this before they take the big leap. We may have time for one more question, and I think there may be a cocktail that may be a lot more interesting than, well, what I have to say, not you. Not you, you're good.
No, wait, you mean we're standing in between them and the cocktails?
Yes.
I love that position.
So we talked about regulatory pressures, but just taking a step back, I mean, just from the point of view of having confidence in what you're proposing as a solution. I mean, I think back to simple machine learning days, and we thought a lot about precision and recall as our guardrails, and we spent a lot of time maintaining our models, even in the narrow world of machine learning, right? And now we're talking 10x, 100x more complications. Any thoughts on sort of what might be sort of the emerging trends of how the equivalent of precision and recall will apply to these broader AI models, and how much time and energy we're gonna have to spend monitoring this?
I don't know that. So I understand why you're using precision and recall as the example of it. I think that best in class over here, emerging practices that I observe is actually whole teams, and this is more so for agentic, okay? Because RAG, I think, had an easier set of evaluation criteria. But what we see is as follows. So if we go use case by use case, there's specific two things. One is the design itself, okay? Because you can divide up tasks, going back to the process that you're trying to agentify, what are the tasks, and how you're orchestrating those agents, design the complexity. There's different ways in which you could design it. So design decisions matter. So no surprise, architecture and design become important all over again. And then I think corresponding to that is the evaluation metrics for some things that might be objective, such as, okay, accuracy of an answer. You will have a certain threshold, which is usually comparable to the human. It's not an absolute number. It's what did you have in your human process? And therefore, what is the threshold that needs to be met? That's an example of an absolute benchmark. And then there are actual evaluations to see whether the process is proceeding in an acceptable way or not. So you almost want to have a test bench, which has to be run over and over again. So this is a living, breathing thing. It becomes part of DevOps or agent ops. I actually think there's an emerging, slightly modified discipline on like SDLC now for we've started calling it ADLC, no surprise, because it includes these new types of test benches that you need to have. It is laborious and intensive today because it is customized and bespoke and done one at a time. I suspect that before long in all of our conferences, we're going to be talking about ADLC best practices, evaluation best practices, and hopefully sharing a lot more of these playbooks because they will be built on top of platforms like yours, right? Your platforms will facilitate the exposure of some of this data, but then, the practices will need to be built on top of it. So sorry, I don't have a great answer, but this is the direction that we are seeing trending. I'll leave you with one statistic. I was in another conference session with a set of sort of 10 customers who were talking about their internal practices. And I think it was the gentleman from Zendesk. And he said he wakes up every morning and he runs his evaluation suite. And every day the results are different. And he's got to then make some decisions based on that. So just, for what that's worth.
We are out of time for this portion. So some really big decisions to be made. On my left is a demo. On my right is a cocktail. But sincerely, I want to thank you, BCG, Suchi, for giving us this great facility. For the content, for the questions. Raj, thank you for a great overview of where the industry is going and where Kore is going. Michael, thanks for pulling us together. And thank you all for devoting a full afternoon. I hope it was a good learning. I hope you all secured some insights. I hope it helped you inform some of the thinking that you've had. We're going to be around for the next hour or two. Mike and the team are available over here, but deeply appreciate the questions. You make us better by what you ask us because it helps us think about what are people thinking about that we need to be thinking about in our product and our roadmap. So deeply insightful and deeply beneficial. So thank you all and thanks for giving us so much time.
Thank you.